Welcome to meeting number 4 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And with regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting today to commence its study on the accessibility and affordability of telecommunications services. As is my normal practice, I will hold up a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds left in your intervention, and I will hold up a red card for when your time for questions has expired. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses today. From Telesat, we have Mr. Daniel Goldberg, President and Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Stephen Hampton, Manager, Government Affairs and Public Policy, and Ms. Michelle Beck, Vice President of Sales North America. From Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, we have Ms. Patricia Cooper, Vice President, Satellite Government Affairs. Each witness will present for up to 7 minutes, followed by rounds of questions. With that, I will turn it over to Telesat. You have the floor for 7 minutes.
Okay, merci. Good morning, one and all. Madam Chair, thank you for inviting Telesat to participate today. Merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for the invitation today.
industry is highly dynamic and competitive, now perhaps more than any time in our 50-year history. And we're very much in the midst of a high stakes, highly competitive global space race. With focused execution and our world-class team of professionals, I have every confidence Telesat's going to be a winner in this race, keeping Telesat and Canada at the forefront of the fast-growing new space economy and bridging the digital divide both here at home and throughout the rest of the world as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this important hearing, and my colleagues and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have for us. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldberg. We now turn the floor over to Ms. Cooper. You have the floor for 7 minutes.
Chairwoman Romanato, Vice Chairman Cumming and Lemire, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee on Industry, Science, and Technology today on behalf of SpaceX and our Starlink broadband system. The committee's hearing on accessibility and affordability of telecom services is timely and critically important. As this committee is well aware, COVID-19 has brought into high relief the urgent need for universal, affordable, high-speed broadband access. Even before the pandemic, though, Canada's connectivity strategy noted that rural and remote communities have identified challenges accessing affordable high-speed internet as the #1 issue impeding their economic growth. With Starlink, recently authorized by ISED to offer services throughout Canada, SpaceX looks forward to helping to close the digital divide in Canada, particularly in remote and rural areas that most suffer from broadband gaps. By way of background, SpaceX today is the world's largest launch services provider measured by missions under contract. We design, manufacture, and launch our reusable Falcon launch vehicles and spacecraft for missions to Earth orbit and beyond. In this endeavor, SpaceX has had a long and productive partnership with Canada and Canadian industry. In June last year, for example, SpaceX successfully lofted into orbit 3 RCM satellites built by MDA for the Canadian Space Agency's RadarSat constellation. In 2018, as Dan noted, SpaceX, over the course of 2 separate missions, launched Telesat's Telstar 19 Vantage and 18 Vantage telecommunications satellites. And perhaps most notably, in March of 2019, Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques became the first person to enter the Crew Dragon spacecraft while attached to the International Space Station, an important marker on the path to Crew 1, the first operational crew mission to the ISS that SpaceX successfully launched this past Sunday for our partner NASA and last night docked. Given this history, SpaceX is proud to be embarking on another journey with Canada, with Starlink, our next generation space-based internet system that will deliver high-speed broadband to locations where access has been unreliable, expensive, or completely unavailable. SpaceX wishes to thank Minister Baines, Minister Monsef, the professional staff at ISED Spectrum Planning and Engineering Office, the CRTC, Global Affairs Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and many others, including members of this committee, for working with us throughout the regulatory process. We're putting our Canadian approvals to good use. Within a week of receiving our licenses, SpaceX began shipping Starlink kits into Canada for our early customers, including Indigenous communities, and we are starting our public beta rollout for Canadians as we speak. Canadians are increasingly relying on the internet. Statistics Canada show that the share of Canadians aged 15 and older using the internet rose from 83% in 2012 to 91% in 2018. As consumer demands on speed and capacity continue to grow, however, disparities in access and competitive choice persist for many communities. Indeed, 60% of rural Canadian households lack access to broadband, defined as 50 megabits per second down and 10 megabits per second up. As a result, the Canadian government has established a bold and historic commitment to connect 98% of Canadians across the country to high-speed internet within the next 6 years, and all Canadians by 2030. Importantly, the government focused its initiatives on several key areas, including rapid deployment to address broadband gaps during the pandemic, diversity in technology pathways, recognizing that no single solution will suffice to support all Canadians, scalability to ensure networks can grow as demand and uses of the internet change over time. Affordability and network quality and resiliency, particularly in the rugged environments of the North. SpaceX strongly supports these goals, and I therefore want to direct the remainder of my statement to discussing how Starlink aligns with them. As an initial matter, Starlink is a technology ideally suited for Canada. The constellation of Starlink satellites flying close to the Earth will reach Canada's vast territory, whether small rural communities, rugged mountains, or craggy coastlines, where the cost to deploy more traditional solutions often inhibits a return on investment and consequently defers infrastructure build out. Even in its current beta phase, Starlink exceeds Canada's requirements of 10 megabits per second per user. Our early beta testing in the United States is demonstrating speeds over 100 megabits per second to individual households with latencies less than 40 milliseconds. Even in remote locations, Canadians will have access to broadband with the performance necessary for remote learning, teleworking, telehealth, video conferencing, and even competitive gaming. With nearly 900 Starlink satellites already on orbit, Starlink is able to provide service to large portions of Canada now, including parts of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Atlantic Canada. As we continue to launch satellites and with future regulatory approvals in Canada, Starlink will reach even higher latitudes and the other provinces, including the North. And because the Starlink consumer equipment is a plug and play device, deployment speeds become a matter of shipping timelines. As such, Starlink certainly is rapidly deployable. SpaceX is well known for continually iterating and improving our technology. For the Starlink system, this means incremental innovation in both our satellites in space and the consumer equipment on the ground. This iterative approach to system design allows us to inject feedback and improve both performance and expand available capacity on an ongoing basis. The feedback from our early beta testing in the US and Canada will allow us to fine-tune the Starlink service offerings over time. And with the ongoing addition of more satellites, the system can scale as market demand grows and adjust to the ever-evolving uses of the internet. Since our first deployment 18 months ago, SpaceX has established a regular cadence of 2 Starlink launches totaling 120 satellites per month and set a record last month of deploying 180 Starlink satellites alone. Finally, affordability is a key factor for SpaceX, since Starlink is fundamentally optimized as a direct-to-consumer service. SpaceX is designing the system from end to end with cost effectiveness and reliability in mind. As our services grow and we transition from low to high volume production, we remain focused on further lowering the cost. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this hearing. We're poised to offer reliable, high-speed Starlink broadband to Canadians across the country. I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll now start our first round of questions. Our first round of questions goes to MP Cumming. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our 2 witnesses. It's interesting to have 2 partners, yet 2 competitors here speaking to the committee. I want to start with Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg, the funding you received, the commitment for funding from the federal government of $600 million, how does that help your expansion program and deal with, of course, this tremendous problem we have in Canada with broadband service to rural communities?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Cumming. I mean, it's helpful. TELUS has, been in business and providing services around the world for about 50 years, and our model, as Ms. Cooper highlighted, is a little bit different. We're not providing a direct-to-consumer solution. We're working, as we have for decades, with telephone companies, ISPs, municipalities, and the like. What was helpful for Telesat about that commitment from the government is it provides us with sort of an anchor customer here in Canada, which is useful as we're obtaining the financing to build out our system. I mentioned in my testimony that this investment that we're making is a multi-billion dollar investment, biggest investment Telesat's ever made, and we've already invested billions of dollars in our satellite fleet. Our lenders, as you can imagine, are wanting to make sure that we're going to be in a position to pay them back, and having a committed contract like that with the government of Canada, with the sovereign user, is helpful as we get our financing in place. I'd also note it's a great deal for the government. They've got a big country that they need to connect up. We agreed to provide 140 gigabits of very high capacity, low latency, very reliable services at an extraordinarily low cost, multiples lower than what exists in the market today. So it's a good deal for the government, but it was helpful for Telesat too as we get this massive investment financed.
Your launch for your LEO satellite program, it looks like you're 2 years out plus. Two questions for you related to that. What could Telsat do in the interim to try and help with the issues that we have with broadband across rural Canada? And second, are you concerned and what's the barrier to move quicker? Because certainly your competitor, or not maybe a direct competitor because of the model, but certainly they are moving in a much more advanced pace.
Yeah. So listen, right now we're providing broadband connectivity services across all of Canada, and we've been doing that for a long time. We have more capacity and ability to expand services in almost all of the communities that we're serving today. We're working with government at the federal level, at the provincial level, territorial level. We're working with other ISPs and phone companies throughout Canada to open up those pipes. That's something that we can do, again, very quickly. And we've got proposals out there that would allow us to do all of that. So we can make significant improvements in the type of broadband capacity that almost all of these communities have in the coming months. Sometimes it'll take a little bit longer. We have to ship equipment up to the far north, and depending on whether we're hitting the sea lift schedules and whatnot, that becomes kind of the gating factor to getting the capacity out there. As far as ramping up our LEO constellation, right now we'll be, I expect we'll be making some announcements in the coming weeks about who's going to be building those satellites, who's going to be launching those satellites. We're going to put the pedal to the metal on that program. I mentioned that these satellites are in all likelihood going to be built in Canada. We need to get going on it. We're about 9 months behind where we wanted to be. COVID sort of didn't help for that. Am I worried about SpaceX? I'm worried about a lot of things in life. As I mentioned, we're in a massively competitive global environment. I have a super high regard for SpaceX. They've been a great partner for us. They're one of the most innovative companies in the world. And look, I applaud what they're doing. They are innovating. I'll say they're getting a massive amount of support from the US government to develop the technology, whether it's rockets, whether it's the satellites, good on them. But yeah, I'm worried about being able to compete with SpaceX. I'm worried about our ability to compete with Amazon when they come along. It's one of the biggest companies in the world. Certainly, as I mentioned in my testimony, the Russians, the Chinese have their own plans. But as I also mentioned, we've got a great plan, and we just need to get going on this. And I'm very confident we're going to be successful.
Thank you for that. I want to shift to Ms. Cooper. And thank you. I understand that you're going to have a pilot here in Canada. What are the barriers to try and, once you get that pilot started, what are the barriers that you may run into to try and expand that service across, particularly Northern Canada?
Unfortunately, Mr.
Malheureuse.
So hopefully Ms. Cooper can answer that on a subsequent round. We'll now move to MP Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Cooper, In your testimony, you spoke to cost effectiveness and reliability. And on the question of cost effectiveness, obviously it's early days and you are delivering beta kits, I suppose, right now to Canadian consumers. What do you expect the cost to be for Canadian consumers for that 5010 speed when it's up and running?
Thank you very much for that question. So we actually started sending out invitations on Friday to Canadians to join what we call our Better Than Nothing beta. It's a public beta service that consumers pay for at the very early end of our technology development. That beta service was offered in Canada for basically the same price as it was in the US 2 weeks earlier, just adjusted for the prevailing exchange rate. So the kit, the consumer equipment that you need to connect to the satellite at the residence or at the small business or office is $649. That's a one-time purchase of equipment that includes an antenna, a Wi-Fi router, mounting tripod, and a whole bunch of cables. And then the monthly broadband service subscription is Canadian 129. That's our offer for this public beta. Critically, there are no contracts, no early termination fees, no data caps at this point.
So it's fair to say that right now the goal is accessibility, but we aren't really, I think, in some ways addressing the affordability question in a serious way. And maybe I'd put it to Telesat. Are you in the same ballpark? I mean, you're way away from beta testing, but when you are looking to recoup that investment, are you in the same ballpark of those figures, or are you seeing the costs coming down significantly in your estimation?
We think the costs are going to come down significantly. As I mentioned, our model's a little bit different. We're going to be delivering gigabits of capacity to remote communities throughout Canada than our partners, ISPs, mobile network operators, Indigenous bands, and the like, will take our capacity and distribute it throughout their community. At the price points that we are going to be making that capacity available to them to, yeah, they should be able to meet the CRTC definition of broadband connectivity at even lower rates.
And what would be that price point?
Well, ultimately, it's going to be up to our customers to define it. So yeah, it's hard for me to say. I mean, it's going to be offered by, it'll be offered by Bell, it'll be offered by different municipalities and the like. I know what we're going to be providing them that service for. Beyond that, it's just I can't say exactly what their offering will be. And I don't know if one of my colleagues has any contribution they want to make. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Maybe I'll just add quickly that the biggest obstacle and barrier to delivering affordable broadband to really remote and rural communities typically is the backhaul component or backbone. And with satellite, we'll be able to deliver it at a much, much, much more affordable rate, which should contribute to delivering more affordable prices to consumers.
Well, and I get that. I mean, my expectation would be, and the $129 is not so affordable, but I understand it's a beta kit and you're very early days. And I would assume that there's upfront significant investment, and you would imagine down the road when this is up and running 3-5 years from now that those costs are going to come down. I wonder where you would imagine those costs coming down to, though. And Ms. Cooper, do you have a sense of you're starting at 129, but where those costs might go?
Well, you're absolutely right. This is still a beta. We've been offering it for 3 weeks, I think. So it certainly still has early adopter prices and service. The user equipment, this phased array flat antenna that we build ourselves, has content that's more advanced than most jets. So we have been driving that cost down. I think most comparable antennas on the public market have been offered with 5 digits. So we've made the first leaps of being able to get it into kind of a household budget. But we expect the consumer kit to become a lot more affordable, not just from economies of scale as we ramp up to high rate production levels, but also ongoing design decisions that we think will drive the prices lower over time. We don't know where that's going to go. We do have our own internal targets, though.
And with competition being, in your words, Mr. Goldberg, pretty intense, for a layperson, sending these satellites into orbit and competing with other infrastructure or other companies that are sending the same infrastructure, there is the space to have multiple competitors in one geographic territory?
We all need to be very cognizant about where we're orbiting our satellites. We've been doing this for 50 years in geostationary orbit. It's something that we all have to be conscious of, not only just the physical limitations of where these satellites go, but also making use of the scarce radio spectrum to make sure that there's enough of it that we can all leverage to deliver the high capacity services that we need to deliver.
Well, as someone who does a Facebook Live Q&A every Thursday at 8 o'clock and has had to do it when I visit my father-in-law in Kamlaki at a truck stop because internet's not fast enough at his place, I look forward to this becoming a reality.
We're all working hard on it.
Thank you very much. Our next round, le prochain tour, c'est député Lemire. Vous avez la.
And MP Lemire, you now have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Last week, the federal government, via its Prime Minister, announced a program. It's an improvement of the current program. You'd go from 15% connecting Canadians from 2026 to 88. So from Abitibi-Témiscamingue, as I am, I'm worried about the remaining people who will not be linked. So connecting the very last citizen at the very end of a rural route at their camp and so on, that's going to be a real challenge. Your technology, however, is going to be very helpful for linking them to the broadband, ensuring that they will have access, even though we can't get physical infrastructure to them. Is this the case? Is Abitibi-Témiscamingue on your map? And when will we be able to see whether the programming offered by the federal government will be effective for people who are in remote regions? Let's begin with Ms. Cooper, SpaceX.
At this stage in our beta development, our available coverage of Canada is governed primarily by how many satellites we have in space, and therefore how many satellites you see from a given spot on the Earth. So it's dictated a little bit by the architecture of our space constellation, less than business decisions or the ruggedness of the terrain. So at this point, we're offering our early beta service to customers in Canada up to about 50 degrees north. But as we continue to launch more satellites, we will expand that territory to eventually cover all of Canada. So that, I think, is the reality. We've done early projects, for example, in Washington State in the U.S. for the Washington State Emergency Office to support their first responders working in a community that had been incinerated by one of the wildfires. And even in that remote, unconnected community, they were able to use Starlink and pull down.
Je vous ramène au Québec, Madame Cooper.
Let me just bring you back to Quebec, Ms. Cooper. You mentioned that you wanted to link BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, the Atlantic provinces, but you did not mention Quebec. Was this on purpose, or is it because your program does not cover Quebec right now? And more specifically, when will we be able to say that the citizens of Abitibi-Témiscamingue and Quebec will have access to your technology?
The provinces I listed are where the beta has been offered to date. The satellites will cover all of Quebec at some point. The stage at which we offer the public beta in Quebec is now more determined by whether the tests and all the supporting documentation and install kits are stable enough that we want to translate them into French. Right now, we are providing services that are in flux. We're getting the feedback from our customers to try and make sure that the service is as good as it can be, and we're refining information that would be available to the consumer. So certainly we plan to offer services in Quebec. We expect the service to be able to technically cover all of the territory. But we have not started our public beta in Quebec at this point, which I just would remind you started on Friday.
Je vous avoue que je trouve ça plutôt décevant.
Well, this is somewhat disappointing. All of the provinces of Canada are covered, but not Quebec. That said, the federal program mentions support based on the studies that we're carrying out here, about $1 of public investment from the government and matched to each dollar invested by private companies. Does that seem reasonable to you? Is that cost effective? And can we ensure that the final product remains affordable for clients? I can assure you that my colleague Erskine Smith, had the right question. $129 a month and over $600 to buy the equipment. This is not affordable, especially for citizens from rural regions. And once again, Abitibi-Témiscamingue not only haven't access to technology, but are used to it costing so much more and not being able to afford it. So can we expect affordability? And will the federal government programming give you sufficient support to make sure that happens? Over to Mr. Goldberg. Tell us that.
For your question, we're providing service throughout Quebec today. We need to do a lot more to drive the price down, which is why we're investing billions of dollars in our LEO constellation. But we're able to serve all of Quebec today. As I mentioned, we have incremental capacity, and we can improve connectivity in all of the communities. It's something that we're talking to the federal government about. It's something that we're talking to the officials in Quebec about. We have some proposals in front of them to do that. Our LEO constellation, not only will it be focused on and covering all of Quebec, I think we're going to build it in Quebec. So in addition to connecting all of your constituents, we're going to create around 1,000 jobs in Quebec, high-tech jobs, so that we can sustain your economy, not just with broadband connectivity, but by hiring people to build this state-of-the-art constellation.
Je ne saurais vous dire à quel point votre...
I can't tell you just how much we hope that your technology is the right answer, and I would like you to consider my region particularly. Thank you so much.
Massey, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being here. Mr. Goldberg, if we start with what did exactly we get for $600 million? So just kind of lay it out. I think people really want to, and what are the terms and conditions of that $600 million, and how much time do you have in that commitment to fulfill any obligations if they were presented? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the way the commitment works is that we're providing a pool of this very high throughput, low Earth orbit satellite capacity, 140 gigabits. It's more capacity available for Canadian remote communities than exists on all the satellites combined serving Canada today. The federal government doesn't pay anything until such time that we can actually deliver that pool of capacity. So the government's not at risk for paying for something that Telesat doesn't ultimately deliver. It's the term of the agreement is for 10 years. Telesat needs to make this 140 gigabits of capacity available throughout that 10-year period. We need to make it available to everybody. And by everybody, I mean ISPs, municipalities, mobile network operators on an across country, non-discriminatory, open and transparent basis at a particular price. And it's a very, very low price. And then the government pays for that $600 million, essentially $60 million a year over a 10-year period.
Okay, okay. Yeah, no, that's great. And so essentially right now though, nothing's really improved until you start making the investments and delivering the service, and the government then buys up the guest contracts worth $60 million per year for 10 years, provided you actually get that onto the market. So is that kind of in a nutshell how it's going to work?
For that particular contract, yes, it doesn't kick in until the LEO constellation is in service. We've said to the government, there are things that we can do now. There are things that we can do in the interim to improve connectivity across Canada. and then bridge those communities over to the LEO constellation. But that's exactly what we're
Okay.
trying to do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I mean, there's like several government programs out there right now, and there's a lot of confusion about what they mean, especially when it kind of finishes in terms of the end consumer getting access to it. So you won't provide a direct service to the customers. You will actually then provide a service to the providers. So you're kind of you'll need there's another there's another step as it, and then you mentioned municipalities where the market isn't going to provide it, and then Bell or whoever else might want to buy it, and so forth. Now,
Yeah,
this is
and can I just comment on
yep.
that? That's right. And as my colleague described, what we believe to be the case is that the major bottleneck to driving down connectivity costs across Canada is that pipe that comes into these remote communities, and we're going to
Yeah.
disrupt the economics of that. But what's nice about what we're doing is not only are we going to be able to provide connectivity to everyone's home, but it's also going to be available wirelessly by 5G, by LTE. So yes, we're going to connect everyone at home. But another big focus of this committee, obviously, is making sure that all Canadians have access everywhere to state-of-the-art LTE and 5G technology. The way our system is architected, we're going to be able to do that as well.
Okay. Now I do want to get SpaceX in this as well too, but the question I'll go to Ms. Cooper first, and then back to you, Mr. Goldberg. I would like to know exactly, and this is probably going to be one of more difficult questions to answer, is what are the vulnerabilities that you face with using satellites? What would you say your biggest challenges are? I mean, there's everything from international agreements to coordinating flight and off the surface of the Earth, and then on top of that, rotations in space, and more satellites are going to be up there, and what happens to them for repair and a whole series of things. But anyway, can you maybe outline for generally people, because I understand fiber optics, we can control that. That's the land that we have and what we use. But Ms. Cooper, can you go first, then Mr. Goldberg, if I have enough time, Madam Chair, then I'll leave it to them to.
That's a terrific question. These are really complicated projects to do, and there's a reason why in the last two generations that looked to use constellations of satellites, virtually every company went bankrupt. So our founder likes to say our job here is don't go bankrupt. There's a lot of upfront capital that needs to be put in from a financial perspective, but there's also kind of two dimensions on the technology side. You need to be able to build satellites that are enormously capable, but also because they're so close to the Earth, you need more of them. So you need to be able to build volume. Our constellation is over 4,400 satellites in its final deployment. We've got 900 up in 18 months. So we've kind of cracked the code about how to build satellites quickly with high capability. Each launch is of 60 satellites, about a terabit of capacity. And because we are our own manufacturer and our own launch provider, we've been able to control that deployment and manage the costs. So that's been a complicated exercise, but one that I think we've made really good progress on and are happy with where we're headed. The next problem.
Unfortunately, Madam Cooper, that's all the time that's in that round. We'll start our second round of questions, and our first round of questions goes to MP Nader. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you to both of our sets of witnesses. It's always great to hear on this topic. Particular to SpaceX, I do have to thank you for the entertainment on Sunday evening. I have a 4-year-old future astronaut at home who was just fascinated at bedtime watching the launch and wondering why he wasn't able to take a Falcon rocket to go visit Grandma and Grandpa fewer than 8 kilometers away. I tried to explain to him the efficiency of using a Falcon rocket may not cover 8 kilometers, but thank you nonetheless. And I want to pick up actually, Ms. Cooper, on where you were just leaving off about the volume of satellites needed. I mentioned 900 currently, 4,000 give or take needed. I'm curious, kind of from a next steps, how many we need to get to basically cover that last area of Canada, the northern part of Canada. Where do we need to get to cover that area?
So we need to get sort of in the mid 1000s to be able to have enough satellites in view that when you're standing on the Earth, you've got continuous coverage. Right now, there are satellites flying above, but the signals drop out because there aren't enough of them. So one passes, you've got great coverage, and then there's an intermittent gap if you're outside of our coverage zone. So we expect by the end of the first quarter of next year, we'll be able to serve up to sort of the mid 50-degree north latitude. And then for the far north, we need to deploy polar satellites, polar orbiting satellites that kind of go pole to pole. And we actually have that very close in mind. We expect to launch our first polar deployment potentially before the end of the year, but certainly in the beginning of next year. So that's for the space coverage. And then I just wanted to come back to that technology question. The next question is getting this very sophisticated dish cost low. And that's got partly some consumer electronics, dynamics, scale of just volume. But it also has to do a lot with changing some technology. We're building those ourselves as well. So we're trying to move along from that early adopter phase to a really affordable consumer price, but it won't be in the first 5 days that we offer the beta.
That's great. No, appreciate that. Now, curious. I understand that it's a line of sight to the sky type system, for lack of a better word. So I'm just wondering. In theory, I think most places, if not all, would have a line of sight to the sky. I'm just curious. Are there any areas in Canada specifically where there wouldn't be that capacity for SpaceX to deploy the Starlink?
No, there should be enough satellites in view from most spaces, almost every place in Canada, once we have that polar deployment to go all the way up to all the territory. Now, there can be obstructions that mean that you don't see as much of the sky as you need, and therefore you see fewer satellites. We have a cool app on the App Store called Starlink, and you can check your field of view to see where you have obstructions, where there are trees. It'll help you place the user equipment in a place so you see the most satellites and then get the best performance.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I want to turn to Telesat briefly, and a similar type question, focusing more so on the satellite launch side of things. And I might have missed it, but in terms of how many more does Telesat need to be launched in order to get to a similar capacity? I know under the MOU and your commitment is looking at 2 years, give or take, for beta, and then commercial. So how many more satellites need to be launched for your constellation to get to that point of offering services to Canadians?
Yeah, no, thank you. Our system is actually architected quite differently than SpaceX's. We are not envisioning launching thousands of satellites. We've architected our system, and I should note that we have a patent pending on this hybrid orbit topography that our colleagues have developed. We're going to have about 78 satellites in the polar type orbits that Ms. Cooper referred to, so that we can make sure we've got, phenomenal coverage of the north. And we're actually starting our constellation with the polar orbit so that we can make sure that we cover all of Canada and that we cover the far north that we're very committed to serving. And then we're going to have about another 220 satellites in these other types of orbits that are more equatorial in nature. Our satellites are in a little bit higher latitude than SpaceX's, so they can see more of the Earth. And all of our satellites are connected one to the other by optical lasers. So our satellites are always online. And I've got to say, and this is true for both SpaceX and Telesat, because we have so many satellites, and from a point on Earth, you're always able to see multiple satellites. It's actually a whole lot more reliable than fiber. Problem with running fiber into these rural communities, fiber gets cut. We hear about it all the time. Satellites, it's much more resilient and redundant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to Helena Jasek. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. An area that I'm particularly interested in is the whole provision of telehealth. And Ms. Cooper, you did allude to this. I've been to many fly-in communities in Northern Ontario and witnessed the application of telehealth. And quite honestly, at present, it is fairly primitive. The issue of latency, the actual visual is incredibly important in many aspects. I was talking to the Canadian Psoriasis Association just recently. There are only 4 specialist dermatologists in the whole of Manitoba that really know psoriasis, and of course patients are from across Manitoba and have a great deal of difficulty traveling to the centres where the specialists exist. So, could you explain, perhaps Ms. Cooper first, how Leo is hopefully going to revolutionize the potential for telehealth?
Thank you so much. That's a really promising area, and I think one that makes us feel the urgency. We feel like we're a pretty quick moving company, but we really feel the demands of the time to jump in and help as much as we can. Um, so the traditional telemedicine has been to connect a hospital or a clinic so that doctors can talk to each other and consult and access, as you say, specialized, experienced medical professionals. Two of the things that we're seeing now, one of them is in sort of escalating that sophistication. I've been talking to groups that are doing online surgeries using this kind of distance access for telehealth, which certainly puts a lot of emphasis on reliability and on latency. Because our satellites are so close to the Earth, they're about 550 kilometers above the Earth's surface. The ping to go to the satellite and back is less than 40 milliseconds. That's less than what most 5G systems are going to be targeting. So it's a viable platform for time sensitive things, not just a teleconference with your doctor, but in increasing kind of time sensitive applications. The other thing that's happening is instead of connecting the clinic or the hospital, increasingly healthcare providers want to connect the home. They don't want their patient during the course of care to come in. And so it's sort of pushing the connectivity out to a residence, even if just for a short period of time during the course of treatment. So we've been looking at these with various telemedicine groups and clinics, and think there's a lot of promise there.
Thank you very much. I'd like to return, perhaps, Mr. Goldberg. A number of my colleagues have talked about affordability, accessibility, reliability. Where I live in rural York Region, these are all major issues, and especially around reliability. Is there the potential for Leo to compete directly in more semi-rural areas with existing fiber? And I mean, compete in terms of affordability. Like, how do you see this playing out over the next 5 years?
Yes, thank you for the question. Fiber is a fantastic technology for delivering, high throughput connectivity. The problem with fiber is it's expensive to trench and deploy and then maintain, number one. Two, it tends to be single thread. Now you can run multiple fibers, but now you've doubled your cost, and you can close an economic case so long as you have enough population density, because you take the expense of running one or two fibers and you amortize it across all of these users. That starts to break down when you move to communities that are more sparsely populated, and it breaks down when the fiber runs have to become very long, and it breaks down further when you have to get into territories that are just challenging to deploy fiber. So yes, we've mapped out the country. We've done our own kind of total addressable market, really drilling down and understanding where is Leo going to be the best economic solution. Where's fiber going to be the best economic solution? Where's microwave? It's going to be this kind of horses for courses approach to bridging the digital divide. But Leo is going to take on a bunch of that. And yes, it's going to improve the economics, particularly in those communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est député Lemire. Vous avez...
Mr. Lemire, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. I'm actually going to be taking the floor for this one, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Goldberg. How is Telesat not benefiting competition-wise from not offering the service directly to consumers? Do you think that SpaceX could end up in a bit of a price war where you would end up losing out? And as a sub-question, Is the option you're putting forward viable without government help, with the presence of a player like SpaceX in your industry?
Yeah, thank you very much. No, we have a deep understanding of the economics of delivering these services. We think that by delivering this very substantial, very low cost pipe to our partners, that we are going to give them the economics that they need to be able to compete extremely effectively in all these remote communities. I think having SpaceX there too is great. As I said in my testimony, I think the more competitors we have in the market forces everyone to innovate, drives down pricing. The consumer is going to benefit from that. I think that's great. Um, Government support. Listen, uh, for certain of these markets, I expect that there's almost always likely going to need to be some level of government support. That's true in Canada. That's true in the US. You shouldn't have any mistake in your mind that a lot of what SpaceX is doing also benefits from government support. And SpaceX themselves, as they should be, has applied for the same type of rural broadband funding south of the border in the United States. The FCC has set up a very large fund, the RDOF fund, that's about, I don't know, north of 20 billion US dollars. And SpaceX rightly has applied and is a qualified applicant in that fund. It's going to hopefully help bridge the digital divide in Canada, but it's going to get some support from this government funding that's out there. Our services are going to be viable. We're going to change the game in terms of the economics. For some of these very, very small communities, might still be the case that having some level of government support is going to continue to be necessary. We're seeing that all over the world.
Merci. Je pense que
Thank you for that. I don't think I'm going to have time for a second question. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Thank you, Mr. Champoux, for that question.
Goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Real quickly to Mr. Goldberg and Ms. Cooper, does your companies have any partnerships or involvement with Huawei?
We do not.
Neither do we.
Okay. And what is your position with regards to the government? Obviously, is investing in several programs with the spectrum auction. That also is going to lead to competition to your particular situation, because it'll open up some different markets. So I just want to curious as to what's your position on the government and the spectrum auction, releasing it sooner or later.
I'm a big believer that in order to really provide Canadians with effective, modern, advanced telecommunication services, 5G's got to get rolled out in Canada. Canada's a little bit behind some of the other major economies on this. One of the big barriers to that is scarcity of what's called mid-band spectrum. Telesat was a very active participant south of the border at the FCC, where the FCC repurposed about 3/5 of the mid-band spectrum that the satellite operators use, has repurposed it for 5G. Now, we all use that spectrum today for satellites. The FCC provided $18 billion to the satellite operators to clear that spectrum, build new facilities, and to preserve all those existing important services. Our two biggest competitors, already 4 times bigger than we are splitting that $18 billion. Canada, I said, just started a consultation on this. Telesat came forward proactively and proposed to accelerate the clearing of mid-band spectrum because the wireless carriers need it. But we're using all that spectrum today for rural broadband and broadcast services and public safety. So we've proposed that we be allowed to repurpose some of the spectrum, make it available quickly to the wireless operators, take the proceeds, build LEO, and then get the rest of the spectrum back to the government so that they can auction it and send a check to the Treasury. We need them to do this. We need it to finance our LEO. And at a minimum, we need it so that we can maintain a level playing field with our great big international competitors that have cleared the exact same spectrum south of the border and are getting $18 billion that they're investing in ways that are competitive and threatening to us. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. That's a good summary.
Thank you very much. And our next round of questions goes to MP Sloan. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. So I'll give Mr. Hampton maybe a chance to answer some questions. For the Telesat program, what will startup costs be? Will there be additional receivers or things of that nature that need to be purchased? Or whoever would like to answer that.
I'll take that question. So in terms of the service, to be able to provide connectivity into these remote communities, antennas will need to be deployed that are compatible with the LEO constellation. And these antennas or terminals will be equipped, not unlike the Starlink, but with a modem with the proper mounting gear and the antennas that will be able to receive and then transmit the signal back. That essentially is what is required, and that will interface into the local infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, the last mile to connect the entirety of the community.
Would you expect the cost of that to be comparable to what Starlink is putting forward? So maybe $650, under $1,000, something like that?
So the infrastructure that we are actually deploying as part of our service is enterprise or carrier grade. It's comparable to fiber build. So it's extremely high reliability, extreme availability. There's going to be built-in redundancy in terms of the components that form the ground solution. We're here serving the entirety of a community. So that includes full government services, public safety, schools and hospitals, and they can't afford any downtime. So the way that we're designing this is to be carrier grade. So it's going to be more expensive, but it will serve the entirety of the community. And so those costs get essentially sort of amortized across a much larger base.
So if I understand what you're saying, you're sort of saying you only need one receiver per community?
Yes, correct.
So then what would an individual consumer's cost? So they don't need to buy anything, an individual consumer, but there could be some fee to spread the cost of the community receiver amongst community participants. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yes, so the ISP or the telecommunications provider will invest or purchase that remote terminal. It will be installed and they'll connect that to their local infrastructure. Consumers or businesses, local businesses, will just pay a monthly fee for their internet service. And that monthly fee will depend on the type or the tier of service that they want to subscribe to. The nice thing about our service is we can make available a 50 by 10, but we can also achieve much greater data rates as well to be able to serve schools and local governments and businesses that not just that want greater than the 50 by 10 megabit per second. We can give them gigabits worth of connectivity.
Okay, thank you. Could somebody from Telesat quickly comment on the impact of this service on cell phone connectivity? It seems as if there is some impact on that. If you could comment on that briefly.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, basically, we're going to connect every tower on the edge of the network. So right now, on the edge of the network, and you know this when you're driving on some remote highway in Canada, you don't have any cell phone coverage. Now all these towers can have a little dish that's interfacing with our LEO constellation. We can deliver as much capacity as they want to any of these towers. So we'll be extending the reach of all of these wireless networks to cover all of Canada, and not just cover Canada with some thin layer of connectivity, but have available everywhere in Canada kind of a 5G equivalent level of service, which isn't just useful for all of us when we're driving around.
Could I just cut you off there? I'm sorry. I just want to get in one question to Ms. Cooper. Ms. Cooper, will there be any direct jobs that will be brought to Canada through Starlink, through any satellites being built here, or in any type of installation with your services? If you could just comment on that briefly.
Thank you. So the satellites are being made by us in the United States, and they'll be launched by us out of the United States. But we do aim to provide and install and operate gateways throughout Canada, which would be network equipment where consumer signals are aggregated. They sit on good fiber. So we would have leases with local land holders and also pay fiber operators for their connectivity. But right now we're not approved for those gateways. So at this point, in the early stages of our beta, those installations are in the U.S. for the moment.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to MP Johari. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank to both witnesses. It's a quite informative session. A lot of my colleagues, all my colleagues, talked about accessibility, affordability, the speed, reliability, quality, resilience, and scalability. And you're both witnesses talked about the number of satellites that they're going to launch. A question for me, more on the technical side, is how we're going to position all of these satellites in the low orbit. I mean, when Mr. Goldberg was talking about the satellite, you mentioned that the 220 satellites and the 78 satellite, it's going to be on a higher latitude than what SpaceX is putting. I'm looking at SpaceX talking about 4,400 satellites. 9 of them already in place. We're talking about 300 satellites. We're talking about Amazon and Russia and China putting all of these satellites in low orbit. So tell me, from a technical point of view, how all of these satellites are going to be kind of hovering around. And I know you're moving into a polar orbit satellite to cover, let's say, what you call mid 50-degree north and up. How all of these things are going to be there? How do you guys plan to put this and inform each other and make sure that there is no, collision?
I'd be happy to take that.
Sure.
Just first to say that SpaceX takes space safety really seriously, not only because we're a technology company and we like to solve puzzles and make sure that we invent new things, but also because we've got the responsibility of carrying people, astronauts through space. That's the highest level of responsibility. And so we certainly care about this issue very deeply. So there are a couple elements of what you asked about. One of them is sort of the physical space. How do you keep the satellites from collision? How do you make sure they don't run into each other? And that's an important element of space safety for sure. And that's done with first some planning in terms of where the satellites are. Space, it's often said space is big and there's a lot of different altitudes. There's, I think, 600 kilometers between where Telesat satellites will orbit and where SpaceX's are. The satellites in plane are also quite far from each other, even within their own constellation. So there's a fair amount of distance between the spacecraft in space.
So does that mean that countries or companies come together and agree that, hey, look, this is the altitude that I'm going to, and it's an honor system, or someone can say, hey, look, this is the most efficient altitude for us to be, therefore I'm going to put it there, and then everyone is going to go for that altitude.
So there is an international registry where you put file for your orbital planes and your altitudes and your frequencies. But I think this wave of LEO constellations is really just at the very beginning, and increasingly those negotiations and coordinations are happening. We, for example, are I think the first company to do an automated collision avoidance system where we take data from sort of a database of where everything is, and the satellites automatically maneuver around them. So part of it has to do with making sure your satellites are competent and can move if you find something. The other is making sure we're improving the fidelity of what we know of what's on space, on orbit. So these are all the pieces of this really complicated study. But I can tell you right now, we all want the environment to be able to allow other
Thank you.
providers.
I really appreciate that. I got a minute, and I want to go to Mr. Goldberg, because Mr. Goldberg, you talked about repurposing of that mid-band spectrum, and you talked about the fact that that has happened in US, and it's benefiting them greatly. And I'm sure SpaceX is using that. So, and I know you touched on it, but can you expand on that one? Like, what is it specific needs to get done for us to be able to open up that spectrum?
Well, what needs to get done is that right now we're using the spectrum for all these different things that I described, and we've been using it for 50 years. In order for it to be made available for 5G, we've got to literally clear the spectrum. That means taking all of the users that are currently using it.
And what do we do with them? Move them where?
We're going to move them to LEO. We're going to repack them on some of our other satellites. It's very expensive. It's very complicated, but we've got a plan to get it done.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to our third round of questions, and the first round goes to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's certainly nice to hear from both Telesat and SpaceX. I was fortunate enough to be with this committee when we went to Washington back in 2017, and the discussion there was a Senate hearing on the rural and remote broadband, and SpaceX was there telling us what we could expect for LEOs in the future. And it's great to see that it has finally come full circle. And yes, it does take a while for all of this technology to be there for consumers. And I think that's really a significant thing that we should all recognize. I think one of the questions, though, that I wanted to start off with, there was this discussion earlier about Amazon, OneWeb in the UK, and also China, Russia, and basically looking at the strategic economic plans that we see. What type of security protocols are required in order to make sure that the satellite array that you have can function without concerns from other actors?
Thank you. Securities. Go ahead, Dan.
Patricia. No, you go ahead, and then I'll follow.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think security is especially important, not just for our consumers' data, which is a high priority for any communications provider, but also for the operation of our satellite. So we have encrypted our signals end to end. We have an enormous amount of reliability and redundancy built into our system for that security, and are operating these at the highest level of best practices.
Mr. Goldberg?
Yeah, I'll just add, look, we've been doing this for 50 years, carrying consumer traffic, government traffic, enterprise traffic. We've always taken that very seriously. We harden our systems, both in terms of flying our satellites, but also with respect to all of the data that comes in. The reality is that these LEO systems are probably even more robust and more resilient than the geostationary satellites. There are just a lot more of them. So from an enemy's perspective, trying to block their transmissions, trying to hack into them becomes much, much more complicated. And I think it's true for both Telesat and SpaceX. We're both doing quite a bit of work with the U.S. government that is placing great hopes on the opportunities to use these LEO constellations. As you can imagine, the U.S. government user has rigorous security protocols that we all need to comply with if we're wanting to carry their traffic. And so we've been doing it for years, and I think we actually have even more of the upper hand with these much more distributed, proliferated LEO constellations.
Thank you. The other question that, and again, I suppose when we were in Washington, this is one of the discussions that we had, is what about the stranded assets that are there from existing telecoms companies? Because there have been billions of dollars that have been put into their networks and into the processes that are there. they of course want to be able to use that, and sometimes that becomes a bit of a barrier to moving forward. Is there a degree of cooperation that you feel will be necessary for them to be able to use the satellite system versus some of the other functionings that they have? And perhaps Telesat, you may be best able to describe that because you deal with those particular operators.
Yeah, listen, we're living the dream right now where we continue to operate, assets that we launched, in some cases over a decade ago, and now bringing on this multi-billion-dollar capability that, in all likelihood will disrupt, potentially some of the investments that we've made before. We always tell ourselves that we're much more focused on cannibalizing what we do than allowing somebody else to come along and do it. To some extent, these different assets are complementary with one another, and they can reinforce each other. To some extent, they're competitive, and I suspect, in other industries, there'll be some winners and some losers, which is why we're running as fast as we can at Telesat to make sure that we're on the right side of that equation.
Does Starlink have some of the similar concerns?
Unfortunately, Mr. Drushan, that's all
Okay.
your time.
All right, thank
I'll
you.
now turn to MP Lampropoulos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will put my first question to Mr. Goldberg with Telesat. You've signed a contract last year with the Government of Canada. I think that the contract is such that the Government of Canada will be investing $600 million in your infrastructure to significantly improve internet coverage, high-speed broadband coverage across Canada. I would like to know, and of course the question has been put before. If it has been, I'm sorry, I had to step out for about 30 minutes, so I haven't heard the entirety of your responses, so I'll be putting the question. Are these new satellites already available? If not, when will they be ready to launch and use? And when will they be able to offer high-speed broadband to Canadians who don't have the service yet? Thank you for the question. I will respond in English.
So I did speak about this a little bit. It's less an investment in Telesat or our project. It's more of a commitment to take very low cost capacity on the constellation that we'll make available to users over the next 10 years at a very, very low cost. I mentioned that we expect to start building these satellites in the coming months. My expectation is that these satellites will be built in Canada. My expectation is they're going to be built in Quebec. And we'll start our own beta testing in about 2 years' time. And we'll be providing service, frankly, for us starting off in the upper latitudes in 2023.
Le plan, comme vous savez, c'est de fournir de l'Internet.
The plan, as you know, is to provide high-speed broadband access to all Canadians by 2030. So that's great. You will surely be in a position to help us get there.
Starlink.
Okay, Starlink. Ma question pour vous.
My question for you, I think you already have some of the infrastructure needed to provide broadband access in rural areas. So I wonder how you will choose where you will deploy, what your priorities will be, how will you be deciding which regions receive internet service first? C'est une excellente question. Alors, au point on en est, au tout début, donc, de la création du système, le facteur prédominant, c'est là où le nombre le plus élevé de satellites sont visibles. Cela dépend donc de la constellation, de l'architecture, si vous voulez, de la constellation. Au fur et à mesure que nous en lancerons d'autres, nous en viendrons à pouvoir desservir le Canada au complet. Maintenant, avec le programme version bêta, nous lançons dans le nord des États-Unis, dans la partie sud du Canada. Donc, sur la frontière, si vous voulez, le long de la frontière, nous voulons étendre le service en lançant plus de satellites. Et puis, c'est un service payant au mois. Les gens pourront se joindre au service en ligne. So you've already started this on Friday, if I understand correctly?
To those who had signed up online at starlink.com a couple months ago to say that they were interested. So we sent out some invitations on Friday to our first Canadian candidates, and then we've already gotten a couple orders. We also sent equipment, I think the day after we got our ISED license, to support some specific projects. One of them, for example, is the Pikenjicum First Nation community in Ontario, which is a remote community that really struggled with broadband access for some time and had very few options. We've been working with the community and the community leaders and expect to connect the community by the end of November.
Merci beaucoup. Et je sais que c'est très difficile à prédire ce genre de...
Thank you so much. I know it's not easy to predict how quickly such things will go, but I would like to know what you think. I know that 2030, our aim, as I say, is to provide high-speed access to all Canadians before 2030. Do you think we could reach that objective earlier? And would you be available to help us?
I think Starlink is going to be a big help in reaching places that otherwise aren't attractive for terrestrial build out or too rugged to reach with terrestrial build out. So we think we will be a big part of that. I will say I don't think satellite broadband is going to be an enormous part of Canada's existing 33 million broadband users. Will be a contributing factor to it. But we absolutely are standing ready to help those Canadians that are least connected.
Thank you both.
Merci beaucoup. Le prochain.
Thank you. The next tour time goes to MP Chabot. 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I would like to go back to my colleague's question and put it slightly differently, Ms. Cooper. If we want to be operational to cover as much territory as possible, obviously the remote areas of Canada, how long would it take for you to become operational? Do you think you could do this in the next few years, or will it take many years?
Have coverage for all of Canada by 2022, and then add capacity to serve additional users. So once we have enough satellites to cover geography, every satellite after that adds capacity to add more users.
Donc, vous
So I
seriez
certainly think that we'll be available for all of Canada before the end of 2022.
seriez-vous à l'aise de commenter en disant que les objectifs présentement énoncés par le...
Do you think you could say that the targets now out in the Government of Canada aren't as tight as they could be, that we could do even better?
Development and say that I think we're moving as fast as we can. We feel the urgency that I think Canadians feel. In fact, we're really gratified to hear so many positive and enthusiastic comments in the public CRTC docket for one of our licenses and expressions of interest afterwards. We're moving as fast as we can, and we're coming soon.
Merci. Question pour peut-être pour monsieur.
Thank you. A question perhaps for Mr. Goldberg. We know that 5G services are coming in progressively. It's a topic that comes up quite often, and 5G will up speeds by 200. Won't be accessible everywhere, but how can satellite technology remain in line with the accelerated speed of 5G, for example?
5G, I would say, is a major part of our business investment thesis. 5G, just as you say, requires much more capacity to deliver the speeds that it promises to deliver, but you need to connect the towers. The towers have to be connected back to the internet backbone with a big pipe. And that's been one of the real constraints on rolling out high capacity wireless services in more remote and rural areas. Our LEO constellation is going to be bringing big pipes to those towers and enabling a 5G rollout on the edge of the network to rural and remote communities.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldberg. We'll now go to Mr. Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that has been touched on a little bit, but what does Canada need to do with other like partners in the world for communications for, I guess, spacing satellites and so forth? You said I think Ms. Cooper mentioned that there's a registry, but that doesn't sound like a solid solution for um, for the future. So any comments, Ms. Cooper and then Mr. Goldberg on that, advice to what we need to do in Parliament for that as legislators?
So I would just say that I think almost every space agency and satellite regulator around the world is looking at what this emerging LEO environment requires to make sure that the rule sets and the expectations for responsible action translate into local rules. I know I've talked with the Canadian Space Agency and with ISED Space Group to understand their thinking in the U.S., which is our home environment. We've been pressing all the regulatory agencies and policy agencies to expect more of their operators and to set higher goals in their licensing applications. One of the other things would be to improve the amount of transparency that all licensees have to show about how they're going to meet those requirements. What's their plan and how are they doing against those plans? So I think not only participating in an updated backdrop of rules and expectations, but also expecting your operators to show transparency about how they're doing and what they're doing. So that becomes a differentiator instead of something to keep from disclosure.
Okay, and Mr. Goldberg, your thoughts on this? Like, we can't even get Canadian citizens out of Chinese jails, let alone try to, coordinate some of these things here. So, what are your thoughts on how?
Yeah, listen, it's a really big issue, and both Patricia and I have spent a substantial part of our careers grappling at the international level, trying to make all actors be responsible. At the end of the day, you're dealing with countries and sovereign governments, and some of them strictly follow the rules, others thumb their noses at the rules, and there are no easy answers. It's done. ISED is very capable in this area. We participate under the auspices of the UN group called the ITU. Um, there's a lot at stake, and there's a lot of work that has to happen.
If I might add,
unfortunately, that's the end of that round. But perhaps you'll be able to get a chance at the next round. Our next round of questions goes to MP Cumming. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Goldberg, it looks like not only we have a race to try and provide better internet service, but it's a race to raise capital. How important is it to free up some of that spectrum space and your suggestion that would assist Telsat with your future raises and capital towards your LEO expansion program?
No, thank you for the question. It's vital. The $18 billion that I mentioned that the FCC allocated to our two largest competitors, they're already spending that money. We have many operators in the sector that are worried about all that capital, frankly, destabilizing our industry to some extent. Our two largest competitors are recipients of all that money from clearing the same spectrum that I said is now looking to Telesat to clear. We're happy to clear that spectrum. Canada needs it for 5G. But two things need to be kept in mind. One, we're using it today, and nobody wants the important services that we're providing to be disrupted. And it's going to cost money to relocate those users and not to disrupt their services. And two, yeah, we're spending, multiple billions of dollars to fund LEO. It's the right thing to do for Canada. It's the right thing to do for Telesat, but it takes capital. And we are hoping and cautiously optimistic that just like the satellite operators who cleared that spectrum in the US receive compensation, that we'll be in that same position here in Canada. If we don't get it, two bad things are going to happen. One, all of these existing services that we're providing are going to be at risk. I can't imagine the government allowing that to happen, but they'll be at risk. And two, Telesat will be at a severe competitive disadvantage to these already bigger competitors who have received $18 billion for clearing the same spectrum. That would be a travesty. I hope that doesn't happen. If the government follows through on the recommendations that we made, it's a big win-win-win. The wireless operators get more spectrum for 5G fast. Telesat can look after and reposition all the existing users of the spectrum, and we'll receive some of the financing that we need to build our LEO constellation, make the 5G spectrum available, and give us a fair shot in this very, very competitive space race. We've got a great plan. We got a great company. We've got super committed people.
Madam Chair, have I got time for one more quick one?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, you have 2 minutes and 10 seconds.
Great, because there's another important question that I wanted to get to with you, Mr. Goldberg, and that relates to we're all excited about the LEO program, both yours and SpaceX's program as a potential solution for rural broadband. But in many communities, there is already fiber into the communities, and in many cases, the government's provided funding for that fiber. I don't think you necessarily say that you're the solution though, to those communities, but can you offer any comment? It strikes me that there should be the opportunity to use that backbone to provide broadband access to many of these communities, maybe not necessarily direct wire, but it could be fixed wireless, could be a variety of different programs for those communities that already have fiber into their community. Can you offer any advice on that?
Yes, there is fiber to many of these remote communities. And I said earlier, fiber is a great technology when the economics make sense. Problem with fiber, though, particularly for these remote communities, as I mentioned, is it tends to be single thread. And when that fiber gets cut, and invariably fiber gets cut, these communities can be off the grid for days and days and days. And it's not just the inconvenience of not being able to, book a hotel reservation or watch a Netflix show. There are public safety concerns, there are health concerns. It's serious stuff. And so, yes, our LEO capability, even in those communities, should be regarded as complementary. We can double up on the capacity. We can make it redundant. We can, really protect those communities from the inevitable disruption.
And thank you for that. But still, to the main point, if it isn't single thread, if there is fiber installed, surely that there should be an opportunity for us to expand that and get these communities some service outside of just the LEO system.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, the great thing about LEO is it covers the entire country. We can serve, a community today. We can move that capacity the very next day. So yeah, I'm not sure I totally follow the question, but 100%, this it's a horses for courses kind of approach for bridging the digital divide in Canada.
Thank you very much. And we'll now go to MP Amos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I think that all of rural Canada right now is exceptionally excited by the prospect of LEO technology rendering better digital experience for that region. As I represent a rural Western Quebec at 30,000 square kilometers of undercovered terrain, there is a great deal of frustration, and people are looking for all manner of solutions. But there's also a great deal of or a broad lack of understanding of what is exactly LEO is going to be offering and how. And obviously, as we've heard from our witnesses today, there are different business cases for the Telesat offering vis-a-vis SpaceX. And so I appreciate the outlining of that. I wonder, Mr. Goldberg, if you could enlighten Canadians further on the nature of the global competition among LEO satellite operators. I think that what are some of the big challenges that face Telesat, and how does that compare with challenges facing other providers? I have heard that that we can expect consolidation in the industry over the coming years, but I don't understand all of those dimensions, and I think the public would like to understand better where the business for LEO is going longer term.
Thank you very much. Well, certainly LEO is sort of the new frontier in at least global broadband connectivity. All of us who have been providing satellite services for years have realized that we just can't do it effectively enough way up in geostationary orbit. We need to get our satellites closer to the ground so that we can provide lower latency, higher capacity services. The key players in this area, you've got two of them on this committee today. It's Telesat, it's SpaceX. Amazon has its own plans to do this. The Chinese and the Russians have their own plans. And there's a company called OneWeb that was backed by SoftBank, is now backed by the UK government, and mobile network operator called Bharti, which is one of the largest mobile network operators in India. And they're providing services in other parts of the developing world. And we all, I would say, face something of, I don't know, different challenges. I'd say our biggest challenge at Telesat right now is just raising the rest of the capital that we need to build our system. We've got over $1 billion on our balance sheet. We're investing every nickel we have into this, but we need to raise some more funding. I hope that this ISED spectrum proceeding will be one source of that. Amazon, their problem isn't capital. They've got plenty of that. Their problem, frankly, is they're brand new at this. They're behind the ball. They're not moving as quickly as SpaceX. They're not moving as quickly as Telesat, and they don't have good spectrum rights. Patricia and I, Ms. Cooper and I both talked about the need for these satellites. You have to make sure that they don't bump into each other, but you also need to make sure that you have rights to use the spectrum that you need to deliver the service. Amazon is in bad shape from that perspective. OneWeb got out early. They launched their service. They had two problems. One was raising enough capital. Two, they clearly didn't have the depth of technical expertise that they needed to have to design and implement a really capable system. Telesat has that in spades. SpaceX is a leading space technology innovator. OneWeb kind of had two strikes there. For China and Russia, I'm concerned about them. Capital is not going to be the problem. They're strong on space technology. They're going to be formidable competitors in this area. It really underscores why one needs to move quickly in order to carve out their niche in this market and start delivering services out there to the customers.
Thank
I
you
hope
for that.
that was helpful.
Thank you for that. So I take it from your comment then that the government of Canada's investment of $600 million in Telesat's operation, so that rural communities can be better serviced, that not only provides a significant boost to this leading Canadian contributor to low Earth orbit satellites, but also serves as a bulwark in a way, in a broader set of geopolitical considerations around the deployment of LEO by other countries, including China and Russia. Could you comment on that, both from a
Yes.
domestic standpoint and
Unfortunately, Mr. Amos, that is your time. But because we have a bit of time remaining, what I'll do is I'll start a fourth round. So I will give each of the parties their time slot. So you will do the first four. So perhaps at the next round, the Liberal round, Mr. Goldberg, you can answer that question. So with that, I will go to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair. Ms. Cooper, you had talked about some of the costs for consumers and so on, and the Starlink internet, $129 a month with a dish cost of $649. And you'd also said that there's, at this particular point in time, unlimited with no data caps at this point. So when you're looking at the new price points, you have a bit of an idea what one might be able to expect once you have gained some economies of scale. And when you say no data caps at this point, Which way do you think you're going with that? I mean, are you going to be looking at data caps once you have more customers? What are your basic thoughts on that?
Thank you. The first point I wanted to make is in terms of the equipment that a customer needs to pay, the one-time upfront cost, we think we've got a really clear path to driving that equipment price down. It's one of the hardest problems in these LEO systems, that's specifically those that go directly to consumers, and you want to have tens of thousands of them at a low per unit cost. So that we definitely have a path for that, again, both because of economies of scale and some future design developments. I don't want to say much about where we think the price is going to go or how the service is going to evolve, because we are really genuinely taking feedback from these beta tests. And I think that's something that we're going to really need to understand better in terms of how actual customers use this, and how we need to understand the management of the system and the flow of traffic that an increasing number of users have. I do want to mention two quick things on cost. Obviously, the expense of deploying the network is one important element. We are a privately held company. We aren't publicly traded. And I wanted to clarify from Dan's comments about the $18 billion spectrum clearance in the US. That doesn't affect us. We aren't a previous operator of satellites. We don't operate in those and don't have any services in the frequency bands that have been cleared. So I just wanted to make sure that was evident. One of the other big I would say advantages we have is that it costs a certain amount of money to deploy a satellite. And because we have not only our own launch services available, but we also have the advantage of the innovation of launch reusability. We're flying our satellites on rockets that have been used 2, 3, 4, 5 times, which is unheard of in the deployment of commercial satellites. Coupled with the sort of innovations in the satellite design, this all brings a more affordable deployment of the space architecture at the same time that we're driving down very hard on the equipment price past this early adopter first beta test.
Thank you very much. And just one of the comments earlier is you won't get really great service past the 50th parallel. Well, most of Alberta and Saskatchewan are north of the 49th parallel. Yeah. When we think about that, we have to wait until you get to that stage where the coverage is something that is going to be significant. I just wanted to ask, perhaps Ms. Beck, you had talked about antenna capabilities, the costs that would be associated with that with the LEO constellation, and again, with the receiving and transmitting aspect of it. The question that I have is there a differential with the type of broadband spectrum that you would be using as far as the cost, either for the antennas or for distribution out to the public? Is using a one wavelength versus another wavelength, does that change the cost for the consumer or for the ISO?
So thank you for that question. So I would say that the LEO constellation, the frequency bands that we are employing for our own constellation are in the Ka band. And the one advantage that we have using those frequency bands is the amount of spectrum that is available to us to deliver services. So that's the first thing. You need a lot of spectrum to be able to deliver broadband services. The other thing is we reuse that spectrum, not unlike cellular service. So we reuse it over and over and over again to cover the Earth, and that amount of spectrum gets multiplied over. So that's how we're able to deliver. So that's how we deliver a lot of capacity.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Ms. Beck. Unfortunately, that's the end of that slot. Well, I'll now offer the time to Mr. Amos. You were not finished your round of questions, so you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give the floor immediately to Mr. Goldberg to comment on that geopolitical aspect that I raised.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's a hugely important question. The reality is, on the one hand, we operate these satellite constellations and they provide service to consumers, and you think, okay, that's kind of the end of the picture. On the other hand, space is strategic, and governments are very actively participating in the development of space and the development of technologies that fly in space and that fly to space and access space. And if you look at these Leo constellations, and they're a great example of, of the important sort of strategic dimensions of them and the role that government has to play here. So it's certainly the case, and it's obvious when the Russians, when the Chinese, even when the government of India is participating in the space sector, they're doing it through their state-owned companies, and they've taken a strategic decision. Space is important. Space has, implications in terms of their ability to look after their citizens, but also for national security implications. And they're making heavy, heavy investments. The same is true of the U.S. Again, I take my hat off to what SpaceX has developed, but listen to what Ms. Cooper said. Ms. Cooper accurately said that because of their ability to launch satellites, they're vertically integrated. It gives them some advantages in terms of deploying a LEO constellation going the next level. It didn't happen by accident. The Obama administration made a very conscious strategic decision to move the US away from launching the space shuttle all by itself and relying upon US commercial industry to develop a capability. SpaceX rose to that challenge and answered the mail, but in doing so, they've received billions and billions of dollars to help them develop those rockets, develop the Dragon capsule that we all witnessed last night, and now to develop low Earth orbit satellites and the like. That's an enormous advantage to them. And so, yes, on a smaller scale, the $600 million capacity agreement that we did with the government of Canada was vital to try to help Telesat compete against these behemoths, not just the companies, but the governments, and try to be competitive in this sector. And I think we're going to get there. But it is a space race. It's an extremely strategic area. And not only Russia and China and India, it's the United States, it's the Europeans, it's the UK backing OneWeb. If space is important to Canada, then Canada is going to need to open its eyes wide, look at what's going on in the world, and participate in this area. And so, and Canada has been doing that. But to beat the drum one more time, this proceeding that's taking place at ISED right now is crucial. It's existential to Telesat and to our plans to invest in LEO and to compete globally. So
thank you for those comments, Mr. Goldberg. And obviously, I did have the privilege of joining Minister Baines at the earlier announcement at the Aviation Museum in Ottawa. And so I do believe that these are important and strategic investments, both for domestic rural broadband deployment, but also for our capacity to build crucial and strategic innovation sector business opportunities. I'd like to turn to Ms. Cooper. I know I have limited time left, but I wonder if you could speak to some of the geopolitical considerations and perhaps some of the risks that face North America as we enter into an era of significant LEO service provision.
Well, thank you for the question. I do think it's an important area. I want to clarify something. I think the U.S. government has really shifted its focus from being an owner operator of satellites and launch vehicles to being a customer. So the great privilege and that we have enjoyed as a supplier to the U.S. government is to provide services. The contract that we have with NASA to deliver those astronauts is a service. We own the capsule and the rocket, and that's a very different thing than having a state-owned development money put in. I do think that's one of the things we'll want to watch going forward. These projects are very difficult, but the drive is to fuel a connectivity demand that is very large. So that's one of the drivers for a lot of the more, sort of commercial ventures. I think that the early indicators are that other state-driven economies are starting to look at the kind of platform that these LEO constellations that only a few years ago folks thought were improbable. So we're glad to be breaking those expectations and fielding some copycats.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est député Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Do you think that Canada should reorganize spectra based on urban or rural areas in order to facilitate access for smaller internet providers? So what do you think about this? What do you think about the size of licenses in Canada? I would start with Mr. Goldberg from Telesat.
Thank you for the question. Yes, no, I think the way that I said licenses, the geographic tiers are absolutely important. There's a mid-band auction that I said plans to hold mid next year. They are using Tier 4 licenses, which allows smaller regional operators to build capacity blocks without having to make massive investments for spectrum in areas that they have less interest in serving. So yes, I believe that that's an important approach to allow there to be more regional competition in the market. I think that's an important tool.
Madame Cooper?
So we don't operate in this mid-band spectrum, so we wouldn't be part of that auction.
Madame Cooper, could you put the microphone a little closer to your?
Yes,
Thank
certainly.
You.
Sorry. Yes, we don't operate in the mid-band spectrum, and we're not a part of the coming auction or the auction in the U.S. But I will say, I think there's a very important place for terrestrial operators, and those that infrastructure and that service delivery is, I think, going to continue regardless of what happens with LEO constellations. Our licenses are not regional for satellite services.
Monsieur Goldberg,
Mr. Goldberg, what is the useful life expectancy of LEO? And at what time could we expect that constellation to be renewed or to need renewal?
We've designed these very advanced satellites. We expect that they'll be lasting at least 10 years. The longer they're there, the more opportunity we have to achieve a return on the satellites. It's important that the business cases underpinning these LEO constellations are sound. Ms. Cooper referred to her founder making the observation that the goal here is not to go bankrupt, and we've seen LEO companies do that before. So we've designed these satellites to last long enough so that we can achieve the kind of returns we need. But we'll be not only replacing them at the end of the 10 years, we'll be launching more to scale up the service and to have better service for Canadians throughout.
Thank you very much. And our last round of questions will go to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. This has been really, a really good testimony today. Mr. Goldberg, just to kind of get an idea here, though, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is, like, I've for years have been saying that service is essential. When you look at phones and you also look at government departments, and a number of other things have moved online. We've gone away from bricks and mortar, so there's a greater onus to do that. Actually, that also can push the cost onto customers into individual wallets. And so with your plan, though, right now, what happens after, say, for example, 1 or 2 years, and if it's not viable to proceed with the full rollout of the 600 million? Because I think you did a really good job of explaining kind of how it works. The upside, hopefully, is it might become even more successful, and we all hope that. But what happens, though, if it doesn't prove viable in the short term, the next couple of years?
Well, I'd say we're about to become very, very pregnant on our LEO constellation. We're going to announce the contracts to build it and launch it. It's going to cover the full 300 satellites. Yeah, we're in with both feet here. And listen, in our own business plan, we expect pricing is going to continue to come down.
Okay,
And we've built we've built our business plan to be sort of bulletproof to operate in an environment with declining prices.
Okay.
That's been our experience over the last 50 years. Prices are coming down. We know that's what our customers want, what the regulators want, and we built the business case to support that.
No, and that's good to hear because right now, with obviously, with but even before COVID, as New Democrats, we've been calling this an essential service, like your phone service, your connected into home. We're moving to telehealth. We're moving to all those different things, and now with COVID, education is more prominent and so forth. And just the pricing right now is not acceptable, and we've got to get it down. That's why I want us to change the way we do our spectrum auction. I don't want it to actually be a revenue generator. I want it to actually be more like an RFP to actually push it out to connect Canadians at lower pricing. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair. But thank you. That's you answered that question because that was my concern. Is if we got to get it lower. It's status quo is just not going to work for us, and it's going to keep us uncompetitive in the world. So thank you very much for your time.
We agree. Thank you.
Well, so with that, that is our time for today. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today and your excellent testimony, and thank the members, analysts, our translators, and the clerk and our team in West Block for their help. And with that, I will call the meeting adjourned.